Hi, I'm Miss Tyler, and welcome to Context for Kids, New Testament Backgrounds, Episode 6. Now, I hope that this is the Maccabean Revolt Part 2, and it's Hanukkah Part 4. So I hope that you caught, especially the last episode where we talked about the origins of the Maccabean War, and we're going to keep doing this is just origins today too, and then the next video will be the actual war itself. But then the episodes before it on why the temple was so important and why the feast sacrifices were so important, they're all so important to understand too. Why Hanukkah was so important, why the Maccabean Revolt happened in the first place. So, I was on the long slide, wasn't I? Here we go. Antiochus and the Hellenized Jews, Part 2. Remember we talked about the Tobias, okay? Joseph Ben Tobias, he was a relative of the high priest, and he got appointed as the tax collector over the entire Syrian province of the Seleucid Empire. And, of course, in those days, tax collectors didn't have established laws they went by. They were charged with collecting a certain amount of money, handing it over to the king, and then they got to pocket the rest. And he had an army behind him to help him collect the money. So very quickly he was oppressing the Jews and the Gentiles in the nations all around, and so everyone started to hate not only Joseph and Tobias, but all of the Jews. Because they just, they saw a corrupt tax collector, and so all of his people were hated. That's the way it was in the ancient world. Guilt by association. So we have this situation now where everyone in all the Gentile nations is beginning to, well, they're not beginning, they hate the Jews because of one man's corrupt policies. So, what did he do with this money? Well, he turned Jerusalem into this huge center of commerce. Okay? Not only commerce, but political intrigue. And I mean, the place was never the same. Well, it would be sooner or later, but things were really messed up for a long time. Now, the family of Tobias, of course, got richer, and his buddies got richer, but everybody else, all the Jews that weren't, Tobias and his buddies, and all the Gentiles got poorer. And when you're getting poorer and poorer, and you see somebody else getting richer and richer, it's not going to turn out really good. So let's look at some writings from the time by a very wise man named Ben Sira, means son of Sira, and he wrote wisdom literature during the time that this was going on. He wrote Ecclesiasticus, not to be confused with Ecclesiastes, which is a book in the actual Hebrew canon. Ecclesiasticus was an additional work written during that time, like Enoch and like other pseudepigraphical works. Pseudepigraphic, remember, means false name. People would write these salacious accounts under false names because they would be more popular. But they were very popular, and they're very valuable because they tell us how people thought during those times and how people interpreted the Bible. As a matter of fact, these writings are awesome because they kind of give us a dictionary of terms that help us understand things that pop up in Paul's writings, in the Gospels, and in Revelation. Very useful. But anyway, let's see what Ben Sira had to say in Ecclesiasticus chapter 13, verses 18 through 20, speaking about the rich in Jerusalem at this time. What agreement is there between a hyena and a dog? And what peace between the rich and the poor? As the wild donkey is the lion's prey in the wilderness, so the rich eat up the poor. As the proud hate humility, so the rich hate the poor. Pretty strong words. So now I want to talk about the Am Haaretz. It means the people of the land, and that's what the elites called them. But these were generally faithful, hardworking Jews who loved being Jews. They were proud of their heritage, and they would prove their loyalty towards God in the coming years with their lives. The rich hated them. what did more wealth bring? Well, wealth always brings one thing above all, a desire for more wealth. It's kind of addictive. It's like potato chips or buttered popcorn. Let's stop talking about that. Okay, now I want to go upstairs and make myself some popcorn. Okay, now more wealth really requires self-government, so you can control more of the tax money, control the people, control the commerce. Now that self-government, a measure of more freedom from the Seleucids, would require a Greek constitution like the cities of the Decapolis. And we'll talk about the Decapolis cities sometime. Well, next year, I was going to say this year, but it's 2017. Coming up. Very quick, huh? All right, so in modern terms, we're talking about favored nation status. They wanted Jerusalem to be the exact same kind of city like Damascus was, or any of the other Hellenized cities of the empire. So, the problem is, though, Jerusalem's God's city. You know, it's one thing for cities like Damascus to become Hellenized. They're already heathen cities. It doesn't really matter what goes on there. They can build up and get all this Greek stuff, and it really doesn't matter. Matter of fact, it probably improved situations entirely because the Greeks were more civilized than a lot of these nations were, you know, coming in. And by this time, most of the cities had already fallen like dominoes. They were already all Hellenized. We talked about that last week. Jerusalem was, you know, the big holdout. The Jews were the big holdouts because of their scribes, their teachers. You know, Jerusalem is special. Jerusalem is God's city. It's a religious city. Now, all cities were religious, but Jerusalem was different than any other religious city because it served one God exclusively, not like the other cities where they had idols and they had many gods. Now, if you want to have control of a city like Jerusalem, you know, there's really only one way to do it. You had to become the high priest. But the high priesthood was by heredity only. You know, the high priest served for life. And then generally, his son or a brother or a grandson would take over. Because only certain lines of priests were eligible to become high priests. They had to be descended first through Phineas, and second through Zadok. And those were special grants given to those two men because they were so faithful to God, they were so zealous for His law, and so their families were rewarded. Of course, Zadok was a descendant of Phineas, so it's just one line. It wasn't two, just in case that sounded confusing. Okay. Now, when Israel was ruled by the kings, you know, it was less complicated. You know, you could just, you could get appointed to be, well, you couldn't be appointed to be king, but there was no question of somebody else other than someone from the line of David being the king. And under the kingship, nobody but a legitimate high priest was going, or a legitimate priest was going to be priest. But they were no longer self-ruled. The line of David, no one even knew who. They needed a prophet to come and tell them who the Davidic king should be, because by this time there were a great many possible candidates. Things had gotten very complicated. That's why there were no more kings. That's why they were ruled by foreign powers. They didn't have any of their own kings. Now, the high priest had always in the past only been in charge of the tabernacle or the temple. And they had a part to play in the Supreme Court. Now, this is going to change, because once we get corrupt high priests, nobody's going to want them to have Supreme Court duties anymore, because they can't be trusted to deliver just and righteous verdicts. Now, these relatives, remember, Joseph Ben Tobias was a relative of the high priest that was serving when he was appointed. Okay? And he brought a lot of money in. They'd already used that money to bring in gymnasium. Remember I told you about the gymnasium? The whole big deal about the gymnasium wasn't that they have a YMCA where they can go and do sports. They were doing sports naked. I do not want to see that. Anyway, they also brought in the Greek style of clothing, which was not as modest, obviously. It was very worldly, very flashy. Greek mannerisms. And not to say that everything that came out of Greek culture was bad. I mean, the rabbi-disciple relationship that Yeshua or Jesus had with his disciples, that was modeled on the Greek teacher-student relationship. It was a good system. See, just because something comes from, a certain country doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Like good government is good government. Doesn't matter who's governing that way. Good laws are good laws. Good construction techniques are good construction techniques, as we see with Herod. Wow. Anyway, but they had a problem. You see, the high priest at the time, Onias III, he was not really into this Hellenizing thing. He was not really sympathetic. He was not happy about what was going on. So, how do we solve a problem like Onias? And I'm not going to break into song. Well, how about this? That new Syrian king, Antiochus Epiphanes, or I keep calling Syrian, the new Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, he really wants to take Egypt, and he's thinking seriously about it. He needs money. Why don't we tell him that there's a high priest in a temple full of a ton of gold, and that, he just happens to be more sympathetic to the Ptolemies down in Egypt, all of which was true. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes got really excited, and he sent one of his officials down there, and he was going to loot the temple, and we don't know what happened. Legends sprang up, years and years and years later about, him being met at the temple with fiery chariots and all that stuff, and he turned tail and ran. We don't know, but we do know he left Jerusalem without a cent. Fiery chariots. Could be. We just don't know. I would have liked to have been there, but not as that guy. Okay, well, so that didn't work. That kind of fizzled. Because they really thought they were going to get rid of Onias. If I just say Onias, pretend I said Onias, because I've been... All right, tell the Syrian king that they'd pay a lot of money if he would make one of them the high priest, one of their people. Now that appealed to Antiochus, because it was a simple thing for him to appoint a high priest. Why not? In most countries, that was the way it happened. Everything was bought and sold. But this had never been bought and sold. Not once, not ever. It was hereditary. And so he appointed a Hellenized Jew named Jason. But see, Jason was actually not a bad guy. Now, he liked the Hellenizing. He liked the gymnasium. He liked the Greek thinking. He liked all that stuff. But he did his high priest duties well. But the people didn't hate him, but they didn't respect him because he was obviously, a puppet. But and so they said, well, we'll also give you some money if you, we'll adopt a Greek constitution, and we'll rename Jerusalem after you. We'll call it Antioch. Yeah, Antioch, because there were about 35 different cities named Antioch. In the ancient world, named after Antiochus 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think there was at least 5. This one was 4. Okay? They renamed Jerusalem after Antiochus. So let's talk about the high priestly wars. So Antiochus, like I said, he appointed Jason, who was the younger brother of Onias III. who had been a decent high priest, all right? Now, Jason wasn't terrible, like I said. He actually did a decent job, but he wasn't as rabid about the Hellenization, and he wasn't as much as in the pocket of these troublemakers as they would have liked. So they said, well, you know, we bought the priesthood once. Maybe we can buy it again. Maybe this time we can get someone a little bit more amenable to our cause. So what do you think Antiochus Epiphanes would say when they offered him more money to put in a different guy? I'll be more than happy to. I mean, he was just in it for the money anyway. He didn't really care. It's not like he went into this with an agenda. They were offering him money to do something that he had the authority as king to do, if not the right. He didn't have the divine right, but he had the authority, you know, had the power. Anyway, so they get him to appoint a man named Menelaus, who was truly and revoltingly evil. I mean, the guy, he begins this reign of terror. All right, and he's a brutal man, and no high priest should be a brutal man. They're supposed to be blameless before God. But this guy actually wasn't from the line of Zadok. He was a priest, okay? He was from a priestly family. He was a regular priest, but he wasn't from the high priestly line. He wasn't eligible to have this job. And of course, that enraged the people, the Jews. So he, you know, he starts oppressing the people who are standing in his way. And he actually got the sacred vessels out of the temple and sold them. Now you gotta understand, this is why I talked about the temple a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The things that go into the temple weren't supposed to come back out again once they had been used. They were sacred. This was a sacrilege. Even the pagans were they were flabbergasted. They were shocked. They were disgusted by this action. Just because they didn't worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't mean they didn't think he was a real God and didn't think that he didn't deserve to be treated with respect. Remember, these were polytheists. They think that all gods deserve to be treated with respect. Okay, so now Onias, he comes out of hiding at this point because he's like, you are selling the what? Well, Menelaus hired assassins to kill him. Great high priestly behavior, isn't it? Man, this guy, he's a righteous dude. Not. All right. So, and then all of a sudden things don't go so well for Menelaus. A rumor comes that Antiochus is dead. You see, he'd gone down to fight Ptolemy. And there was a rumor that he died in the battle. And so, who shows up again but Jason, who'd been deposed, and this began a civil war between people who followed Jason, who didn't look nearly so bad now, and people who followed Menelaus. And of course, Jason's people won, and Menelaus went, you know, running. However, Antiochus was not dead. Awkward. So he comes back. He hears what's going on. He hears that the guy he put in the high priesthood has been deposed. Now that is an attack on his authority. When you oust an official, you are ousting the king. That was the way it worked in the ancient world. If I'm the king's official, okay, and the way you treat me is the way you're treating him. You don't treat me with respect, you are disrespecting him. And so these guys had a lot of power. They could behave, that's why they could behave badly. No one could do anything about it, because if you treated him bad, you were treating the king bad, because you were attacking the king's right to put whoever in office that he wanted to, because he had the right, according to the laws. All right? So Antiochus, at this point, he is angry because now it's gotten personal. Up to this point, he didn't really have much to do with this. It was almost entirely the Hellenized Jews. He was just taking money and making appointments. But now that his authority has been challenged and subverted, And probably the yay, Antiochus is dead party they had didn't have, I made that up. But there probably was one. Ding dong, the witch is dead, you know what I mean? Okay, so Antiochus at this point, he's angry. And he says, all right, you are going to be a Greek state. You can no longer follow your own laws, because up to this point they had followed their own laws. All of the nations that they had been over them had let them follow their own laws in their own communities. Not a problem. Now it changes. You can't follow your laws. You can't circumcise your children. You can't practice your religion. And to make sure you can't practice your religion, you got to understand I love the temple because it's God's throne. And what happens to God's throne is what happens. It's when you disrespect God's throne, you disrespect God. And I love my God. On Kislev 25, 168 AD, Antiochus, after he made the religion and the observance of the Jews illegal, he set up a statue of Zeus in the temple of God. And he sacrificed a pig on top of the altar that was only meant to ever honor God. And he defiled it. And he defiled the entire temple. And I can't even tell you all the things that he did. Horrible. Because of this, things started getting something snapped in a few people. Something good snapped in a few people. And I'm going to leave you with a quote, and then we're going to film the next one. What was needed was a few good men. And there were a lot of them. A lot of people who were willing to die for their God, for his laws, and for his temple. This is usually attributed to Edmund Burke in the 18th century, but he didn't say this. He said something like it, and it's been attributed to him many times. For evil men to accomplish their purpose, it's only necessary that good men should do nothing. Well, we're going to have more than a few good men here, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, I'm going to film the next episode, and I'm going to have them back-to-back on videos this weekend so that you can watch them, and we'll have everything done before Hanukkah, because it was just too much to teach, just so quickly. So, anyway, I love you, I'm praying for you, and I pray you have a wonderful week studying the Scripture together, and I'll see you for part 3 in just a minute.